Special counsel Jack Smith is telling Republicans, game on. In a letter just released from his attorneys to Congressman Jim Jordan and Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairs of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee, Jack Smith is offering to testify, but he wants to do so in a public hearing about the investigations he conducted. Jack Smith's attorneys writing this, quote, given the many mischaracterizations of Mr. Smith's investigation into President Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents and his role in attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Mr. Smith respectfully requests the opportunity to testify in open hearings before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Jack Smith's team added just one caveat, quote, he's prepared to answer questions about the special counsel's investigation and prosecution, but he requires assurance from the Department of Justice that he will not be punished for doing so. Jack Smith is making this offer to testify in full view publicly because and after Republicans have alleged for weeks now that Jack Smith's team unlawfully tapped the phone records of members of
Special counsel Jack Smith has thrown down the gauntlet, reaching out to Republicans with a straightforward message. Game on. He just sent a letter to Congressman Jim Jordan and Senator Chuck Grassley, who head the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. In it, he's looking to testify openly about the investigations he's carried out. His lawyers mentioned that given all the misunderstandings surrounding his probe into President Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents and attempts to challenge the 2020 election results, he wants to have a chance to speak up in public hearings before both committees. Now, there is a little catch, though. He's ready to answer questions regarding his investigation and the prosecution, but he's asking for a guarantee from the Department of Justice that he won't face any consequences for doing so. This move comes after weeks of Republican claims that Smith's team illegally tapped the phone records of their members. Now, here's where things get really wild. A federal judge has ordered the release of Trump's secret recordings and other key evidence gathered by Jack Smith, which escalates the situation greatly. We're not just talking about standard documents or witness statements here. This is about actual recordings of Trump's voice, revealing his thoughts, plans, and directives to his aides. The fact that Trump is on record discussing these things is huge because it clears up any confusion about what he knew and intended. It makes it pretty tricky for his legal team to argue that he was misunderstood or that his orders were misrepresented. And before we dive deeper into this, let's keep it real for a second. Mainstream media isn't exactly the most reliable source these days. That's precisely why we created Pump Politics, to deliver the genuine stories, solid context, and steer clear of any corporate spin.
Jack Smith, for his part, has been increasingly public about what he is watching happen to the Justice Department in which he served and to the rule of law more broadly in this country under Donald Trump. Here's what he said back in September about the pardons of those who stormed the U.S. Capitol. It's video first obtained by The Bulwark.
Trying to stop the democratic process, trying to stop the lawful transfer of power, vandalizing our Capitol, intimidating lawmakers, and assaulting police officers. This is among 1,500 pardons that were granted in January of this year. They were pardoned by the president because they committed their crimes in his name and in his interest.
They committed their crimes in his name and in his interest. Special counsel Jack Smith speaking out about the rule of law and against Donald Trump is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Mark Harris is here, former senior investigative counsel for the House Select Committee on January 6th, joins us. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. My friend and colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst and contributing host to Pod Save America, Alex Wagner, is with me at the table for the hour. Her new weekly podcast, Runaway Country, premieres today. So excited about that. We'll save some time to talk about
Thank
it.
you, my friend.
Glenn Thrush, let me start with you. Jack Smith, you and I think were on the air together when we first heard his voice in a public interview. It was a conversation with my colleague Andrew Weissman, who was one of the first people to investigate Team Trump and the Mueller probe. What do you make of this? I'll call it a salvo, back to Jim Jordan. Yeah, I'll testify, but I'm going to do it in public with the lights on and cameras rolling and public witnesses.
Beck Smith has been stepping up and getting vocal about the changes he's witnessed in the Justice Department, where he used to work, and the overall state of the rule of law in our country under Donald Trump. Back in September, he didn't hold back when he talked about the pardons granted to those involved in storming the U.S. Capitol. He described it as an attempt to disrupt democracy, obstruct a lawful power transfer, vandalize the Capitol, intimidate lawmakers, and assault police officers. Those pardons, totaling around 1,500, were handed out by the president in January this year because these individuals committed their offenses in his name and for his benefit. Today we're diving into special counsel Jack Smith's comments on the rule of law and his criticism of Donald Trump. I'm joined by some great reporters and friends to discuss this. We have Mark Harris, who's a former senior investigative counsel for the House Select Committee on January 6th, and Glenn Thrush from the New York Times, who specializes in the Justice Department. Plus, my good friend, MSNBC senior political analyst and host of the new weekly podcast, Runaway Country, Alex Wagner is here with me at the table. I can't wait to chat about her podcast later on. So, kicking things off, Glenn, I want to turn to you. Jack Smith's voice was quite the revelation when he first appeared for a public interview alongside my colleague Andrew Weissman, one of the early investigators on the Mueller probe. What do you think about how he's handling the pressure from people like Jim Jordan? He's basically saying, sure, I'll testify, but let's do it publicly with all the lights and cameras, which is a bold move. This fall, U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan and other federal judges ordered the unsealing of critical pieces of evidence from the special counsel's investigations into Trump's actions. This evidence is what Trump's lawyers fought tooth and nail to keep under wraps forever. We're talking about redacted audio and video recordings from the White House, which should certainly stir up some discussion. So there's been a lot going on regarding Trump and his actions around the election. The judges have turned down his lawyers' attempts to keep some pretty crucial documents secret until after the 2024 election. They emphasized that the public deserves to see these records, highlighting the need for transparency. Judge Chutkan made it very clear that these documents, which seem to tie Trump to conspiracy, obstruction, and fraud, should be accessible not just for prosecutors, but also for everyone to examine. Now, Jack Smith's filings, along with some recently released recordings, reportedly show Trump directly instructing his aides, pressuring state officials, backing plans for fake electors, and insisting that he wouldn't concede the 2020 election regardless of the results. This isn't some vague interpretation. It's Trump's own words on tape, contradicting what his legal team has been trying to downplay for years. Following the court's decision, we're seeing fresh headlines and more legal trouble for Trump. It looks like these records will be really important if there's a future prosecution, especially if presidential immunity gets lifted or if Trump loses the next election and doesn't have that cushion anymore. In October and November of 2025, Judge Chutkan unsealed some edited appendices and recordings related to the special counsel's filings, refusing Trump's requests for delays. This shows she wasn't about to let political issues get in the way of legal transparency. The released materials feature snippets from audio and video recordings of White House meetings, digital communications, and grand jury interviews that outline Trump's involvement in what prosecutors are labeling the election subversion plot. Jack Smith's filings reveal details that go beyond the initial charges, offering a better view of Trump's role and challenging his team's claims of immunity and that he lacked criminal intent. Legal experts who've looked at this evidence are saying it's pretty damning and would likely lead to conviction if it weren't for the protections of current or past presidential immunity. The court has decided to make Trump's recordings public, and that's a game changer for understanding what really went down leading up to January 6th. Each new audio or video clip that comes out just raises the stakes, legally and politically, as we gear up for 2026 and the discussions about immunity and accountability ramp up. By allowing Trump's own words to hit the airwaves, the court is shining a light on what many see as cover-ups and a whole lot of planning to interfere with the election. This is definitely reshaping the legal and public narrative, and the effects are going to be felt for years to come. You can really sense how significant this is. It's not just about witness testimonies that can be questioned or documents that might be open to interpretation. We're talking about actual recordings of Trump's voice, where he discusses plans to overturn an election, obstruct Congress, and pressure state officials to change vote counts. It's the kind of clear-cut evidence that prosecutors dream of because it's so direct and hard to argue against in court. We should really take a closer look at what these recordings contain, the legal fallout, and why Trump's team put up such a fierce battle to keep them under wraps. So let's dive into the specifics of what's captured in these recordings and the other materials that have been unsealed. The little details are what make this situation so legally tough for Trump. These audio and video snippets from meetings in the White House appear to show Trump talking with his inner circle, including his chief of staff, lawyers, and political hands, all about the strategies for flipping the election results. From what I've seen, these discussions aren't just casual chats or Trump blowing off steam about losing. They're in-depth planning sessions where they discuss tactics in detail, debating and ultimately deciding on specific actions. I mean, we're talking about moments where Trump is giving direct orders to reach out to state officials, pressuring them to find votes, create alternative elector slates, or even delay the certification processes. These recordings of Trump pushing for pressure campaigns on state officials are particularly damaging because they indicate that he was personally directing efforts that prosecutors claim were illegal. So, there's been some serious revealing stuff coming to light about Trump, especially regarding his efforts to mess with the election results. We already knew about him reaching out to state officials like Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, trying to get them to find enough votes to flip Biden's win. But now it turns out there are recordings of him not just making those calls, but also planning and strategizing before and even discussing the outcomes afterward. That really adds a whole new layer to his intentions, showing he was up to something way more than just innocent questions about election integrity. Once you hear those recordings, it's difficult to see them as anything but part of a coordinated pressure campaign. Now, one of the really standout points in this entire situation is the whole fake elector scheme, which is pretty significant in the legal landscape. This scheme was about creating lists of phony electors in swing states that Trump didn't win, and then those faux electors were supposed to send their votes to Congress, acting like they were the real deal. This was all part of a larger plan aimed at causing chaos and legal battles to throw off the electoral count on January 6th. If the recordings captured Trump endorsing this scheme and knowing exactly what it was aimed at, then he's got some serious explaining to do. Prosecutors are calling this a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States, and it's tough to argue against that with such clear evidence. Also, the conversations around Trump never conceding the election point to his mindset and his unwavering determination to cling to power, no matter the election results. Typically, candidates concede when they realize they've lost because that's how democracy stays peaceful and functional. But Trump's refusal to step back, insisting he'd never concede, reveals he wasn't playing fair or genuinely engaging in legitimate legal challenges. He was laser focused on maintaining control at any cost. And when you look at all this with the context of his actions, it doesn't just seem like aggressive politics anymore. It leans into something much more questionable and possibly illegal. Finally, the phone records and call logs play a crucial role too, outlining who was in touch with whom and for how long. While we might not have tape of every chat, those logs can uncover communication patterns that help back up what the prosecutors are saying. So here's the deal. The latest developments reveal some interesting theories about how the whole conspiracy might have worked. Imagine if the logs show Trump making calls to state officials or his lawyers, and then those lawyers are quickly ringing up fake electors or other co-conspirators. That kind of timing could suggest some serious planning and coordination. Plus, the timeline of those calls is crucial, especially if they happened right before or after key events like the rally on January 6th or the riot at the Capitol. Now, we've got some new grand jury testimony that's been unsealed. This includes statements from Trump's inner circle who actually decided to cooperate with the investigators, sharing what they saw and heard firsthand. These folks give their testimony under oath and have immunity from prosecution, which really encourages them to be honest. When several witnesses share consistent stories about Trump's role in planning and executing the election subversion efforts, it really strengthens the prosecution's case. It makes it tough for Trump to argue that everyone's lying about him if multiple people who were close allies are all saying pretty much the same thing. And then there's Judge Chutkan, who has been making some major rulings about unsealing evidence. She's clearly showing that she won't let political issues or worries about affecting elections get in the way of the public's right to know if public officials are involved in alleged criminal behavior. Trump's lawyers were really pushing back, claiming that releasing this information before the 2024 election would skew public opinion and disrupt the political process. But Judge Chutkan wasn't having any of that and emphasized that transparency comes first. It's a powerful affirmation of judicial independence, reminding us that nobody, even former presidents, should be able to hide evidence of alleged wrongdoing just because it might be politically inconvenient. Another thing to note is that Jack Smith's filings go beyond the original indictment. This shows that prosecutors are still gathering evidence and building their case despite all the delays from appeals and arguments about immunity. The original indictments were serious but had some limitations. These new filings seem to offer much more detailed accounts of Trump's involvement, giving us a fuller picture of the conspiracy. This could really mean that if Trump ever ends up going to trial, there might be a lot more on the table than initially expected. The situation around Trump is definitely heating up, and the implications of the evidence coming to light are huge. It turns out that the evidence we're now seeing is way more detailed and serious than what anyone thought when the charges were first announced. Legal experts are calling this evidence devastating, suggesting it sets up a solid case for conviction. Honestly, the absence of immunity really highlights how strong the prosecution's case seems, especially when looking at those unsealed materials. We're not talking about amateurs here. These are seasoned lawyers and former prosecutors who know what it takes to get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, and they all agree this evidence fits that bill without a problem. The only thing shielding Trump right now seems to be presidential immunity and the tricky political situation that makes it tough for a sitting president to be prosecuted by his own Justice Department. But here's the kicker. If Trump loses his power or if the Supreme Court narrows that presidential immunity, or if the political climate shifts, this evidence will still be ready to roll in court. With these tapes becoming public, the political landscape is shifting dramatically. Now voters, congressional members, and the media have the chance to hear Trump's own words about his plans to overturn the election. This isn't just some filtered news story or partisan take. It's direct evidence that everyone can assess for themselves. This changes the whole game because Trump won't be able to just write off criticisms as fake news or partisan bias when people can literally listen to him say what he's accused of saying. It also puts Republicans in Congress in a tough spot. They either have to defend conduct that sounds pretty indefensible based on these recordings or break away from Trump and risk inciting his base. So looking ahead, we need to consider what this all means now that so much evidence is out in the open. It's going to have a big impact on public opinion since these recordings are bound to be played repeatedly on news shows picked apart by legal experts and shared widely on social media. When voters can actually hear Trump plotting to overturn the election and pressuring state officials while vowing never to concede, that hits different compared to just reading transcripts or hearing third-hand stories. Audio and video evidence carry this raw emotional weight that makes it much harder to dismiss or excuse, and it could very well change the conversation. So here's the deal. The recordings we're talking about really change the game when it comes to the legal situation surrounding Trump. If the Supreme Court decides that former presidents can't hide behind absolute immunity for criminal activities, or if Trump doesn't make it through the 2024 election, then those recordings could turn into serious ammunition for prosecutors. This isn't just hypothetical. We could hear Trump essentially confessing or directing his alleged crimes on tape, which would certainly make a conviction much more likely than just relying on circumstantial evidence or shaky witness testimonies. You can forget the usual defenses because when everyone can hear the exact words spoken, it's a lot harder to argue that your comments were taken out of context. Now, if Trump manages to win back the presidency, the situation gets a little trickier. He's probably not going to prosecute himself and is likely to instruct his Justice Department to drop all charges. Still, that evidence will be there for congressional oversight and might even be used by states if any charges hold up. Plus, think about his political rivals. They'll definitely use these recordings in their campaigns and during confirmation hearings, and it might haunt Trump politically even if he avoids legal trouble. And let's not forget about his co-defendants and the folks involved in the fake elector scheme or pressuring state officials. They're dealing with their own legal issues, and this evidence could seriously impact their trials. Some of them might even decide to cooperate with prosecutors to lessen their charges, which could lead to a domino effect where more and more people start flipping, making the case against Trump even stronger. With this evidence out in the open, congressional investigations and hearings are expected to ramp up, as members of Congress will definitely want to dig deeper into what's in those recordings and investigate areas that might not be fully covered in the criminal case. So the January 6th committee already put in a lot of hard work on these issues, but now that we have actual recordings instead of just witness testimonies, Congress gets a fresh set of material to dive into. We could be looking at new hearings where these recordings get played and experts analyze them. Plus, we might see officials from the Trump administration called in to share what they saw or were involved in. You can bet the media coverage will be nonstop. Every time new materials get unsealed, they'll receive deep analysis and commentary. News organizations will likely bring in audio experts to enhance and scrutinize those recordings, alongside former prosecutors and defense attorneys who will debate the legal implications. There will be some serious investigative reporting to uncover how those recordings were made, who knew they were out there, and what was done to either protect or get rid of them. This relentless coverage keeps the story alive in public discussion and makes it pretty tough for Trump to brush it off as old news that no longer matters. Plus, these recordings add a significant piece to the historical puzzle, shaping how this time in American history will be understood and taught for years to come. Future historians and political scientists are definitely going to dig into these recordings to figure out how Trump tried to overturn the election and what went off course in our democratic institutions that let things escalate. Having Trump's own voice on tape discussing the plans really clears up the historical record and reduces the chances of revisionist interpretations or myths cropping up about what actually went down. Judge Chutkan's rulings also set an important precedent for future transparency and accountability. They make it clear that even former presidents can't hide evidence of alleged criminal activity just because it might be politically damaging to release it. This principle is going to carry weight in cases involving top officials moving forward, making it tougher for them to claim secrecy or privilege to dodge accountability. Balancing the need to protect genuine confidential communications with the need for transparency regarding alleged crimes is always a tricky task, but these rulings lean heavily toward transparency when there are allegations of criminal behavior. Now, actually using these recordings in trial is going to come with its own set of substantial technical and legal challenges, especially with Trump being involved. You know, the lawyers are gearing up to challenge the admissibility of these recordings on all sorts of grounds. They'll likely argue that the recordings were obtained inappropriately, perhaps taken out of context, or that they're protected by things like executive privilege or attorney-client privilege. That means every single recording is going to need to be authenticated and will have to establish where it's been and its relevance, all while balancing its evidential value against any potential prejudicial effects. It's a long and complicated process that could lead to a lot of pretrial litigation and appeals. However, it's worth noting that judges have already decided these recordings should be unsealed. This suggests they believe the public's right to know and the legal significance of the recordings outweigh any claims to privilege. The international ramifications of all this are pretty significant too. Both America's allies and foes are closely watching how we manage allegations against a former president attempting to overturn an election through questionable methods. Having recordings that offer solid proof instead of just political claims is crucial for maintaining America's credibility on democracy and the rule of law. It's tough to call out other countries for their democratic flaws when we're struggling to hold our own leaders accountable for similar actions. Yet it's also a positive sign that American institutions, courts included, are stepping up to enforce accountability, even against powerful figures, which sends a strong message. So, where do we stand as these recordings are set to be made public and we start to grasp the full scope of the evidence against Trump? We're talking about recordings where Trump's own voice can be heard discussing plans to overturn the election, pressuring state officials, deploying fake electors, and insisting on never conceding. We have phone records and call logs revealing coordination among those in on the scheme, plus testimony from insiders supporting the prosecution's narrative. Judges are pushing for transparency over Trump's wish to keep this evidence hidden, and legal experts are suggesting that this is strong enough evidence to almost guarantee a conviction if it weren't for any immunity protections. With the release of these recordings, we're at a pivotal moment in understanding what Trump did, what he intended, and what he directed others to do. Whether this ultimately brings about any legal accountability remains a bit up in the air with all the political and legal developments still unfolding. It's clear that the evidence we're looking at now is going to stick around for a while and play a crucial role in how we understand this chapter of American history for years ahead. Those shocking crimes that Jack Smith brought to light aren't just accusations anymore. They're facts, all backed by Trump's own recorded statements. This really flips the narrative on its head, especially when we consider the events of January 6th and the whole scheme to undermine the election, not to mention the question of holding a president accountable.